When I got my first real paycheck, I thought, this is it. I finally did it. Years of struggle, of fighting my way back from the mess I made as a teenager, had finally paid off. No more scraping by. No more relying on anyone else. I had built this life on my own, and I was damn proud of it. I wanted to celebrate, but more than that, I wanted to share this moment with my family. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was that last, stubborn piece of me still hoping things could change. So, I invited my parents over for dinner. I had it all planned out. A nice meal, a good conversation. And then, as a surprise, I'd hand them the tickets and Alex Pentispaid trip to a 5-star resort in Florida. 3 days of relaxation on me. A way to say, see, I made it. And I want to share this with you. But the second they stepped into my apartment, I knew I had made a mistake. My mom barely glanced at me before her eyes started darting around the room, scanning everything like she was looking for something out of place. My dad followed her in, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. You really live here? She asked. I forced a smile. Yeah, this is my place. She hummed, unimpressed. My dad, meanwhile, was already moving through the apartment like a cop on a drug bust. He opened cabinets, peeked behind the couch, even ducked to check under the sink. I frowned. What the hell are you doing? He didn't even look at me. Just making sure you're not hiding anything. The words hit like a slap. I felt my jaw tighten. Seriously. I let out a dry laugh. You think I've got drugs stashed in my own apartment? He straightened up, finally meeting my eyes. Old habits die hard. There it was. The same look. The same judgment. No matter how much time had passed, no matter what I had done to turn my life around, they still saw me as nothing more than a screw-up. I took a slow breath, forcing the bitterness down. Let's just eat. Dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it turned into another reminder of how little they thought of me. I told them about my job, how hard I'd worked, how proud I was to finally be independent. Mom barely reacted. Then, with a smirk, she said, more money means more drugs for you, doesn't it? Dad laughed. Actually laughed. My grip on my fork tightened. Why do you keep doing this? My voice came out quieter than I wanted, but I couldn't help it. Why can't you see me for who I am now instead of who I was years ago? Dad scoffed. Because people don't change. No matter how much money you make or how nice your apartment is, you're still an addict in my eyes. The words stung in a way I wasn't ready for. You were 14 when you started, he continued. Old enough to know better. Do you have any idea how much money I wasted on you? Sending you to rehab, cleaning up your mess? If you're really making so much now, maybe it's time you start paying us back. I blinked. I had expected them to be distant. I had expected them to bring up my past. But this was cruel. I was grieving, I said, my voice barely steady. I lost Nana and Pops, and I didn't know how to handle it. And instead of helping me, you just threw me away. Mom leaned forward, her tone almost playful. Once a black sheep, always a black sheep. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. I had spent years carrying the weight of my mistakes, punishing myself over and over. But sitting there, listening to them talk about me like I was still that lost, broken kid, I realized something. It didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter how much I changed. In their eyes, I would always be a failure. Dinner ended with them gushing over my younger sister, Sophie. Their perfect child. The golden one. While I sat there in silence, swallowing the bitter taste of their rejection all over again. By the time they left, I knew there was no point in telling them about the trip. Why should I? They didn't deserve it. I was still angry when I got home that night, pacing my apartment, my mind replaying every cruel word. And then, as I stared at the unused tickets on my kitchen counter, an idea hit me. I wasn't going to waste this on them. I was going to take the trip myself. And I was going to bring someone who actually deserved it. Sophie. When I called Sophie and told her about the trip, she went quiet for a second. You're inviting me? She sounded genuinely surprised. Like the idea of me choosing her over them had never even crossed her mind. Yeah, I said. I was going to take Mom and Dad, but after that dinner. I let out a humorless laugh. Let's just say they made it pretty clear they don't deserve it. She hesitated. You don't have to say yes, I added quickly. I just thought it'd be nice. You've been dealing with their crap too, and I want to go, she cut in. I really do. I hadn't realized how much tension I was holding in my shoulders until that moment. Sophie had always been the golden child, the one they adored. But lately, I'd started to wonder how much of that was real, and how much of it was just them using her to make me feel even smaller. She was the only person in that house who had ever looked at me with something other than disappointment. And if anyone deserved a break from them, it was her. The next morning, we boarded a plane to Florida. The resort was even better than I imagined. Tall palm trees, sparkling pools, the ocean stretching out in the distance. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen. And for the first time in a long time, I felt light. Sophie walked beside me, taking it all in. "This is insane," she whispered. "Yeah," I grinned. Figured we deserved something nice for once. We spent the first day doing everything and nothing at the same time. Floating in the pool, sipping drinks we couldn't even pronounce, lying in the sun until we felt too warm, then diving back into the water. I watched Sophie slowly unravel, like she was finally letting herself breathe. That night, we had dinner on the beach. Candles flickered on the table, waves rolled softly in the background. It was perfect. But Sophie was quiet. She pushed her food around with her fork, lost in thought. Finally, she said, "I'm glad you didn't give this to them." I looked up. "I mean it," she said. "They would have just found a way to ruin it. You know that, right?" I exhaled slowly. "Yeah." She bit her lip, staring out at the ocean. I need to tell you something." I set my drink down. "Okay." She hesitated, then took a deep breath, like she was bracing herself. "I found out why they really hate you so much," she said. A weird chill crept down my spine. I forced out a laugh. "That's not exactly a mystery, sophomore." "No, Alex. I mean, really why?" She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "They used to," she said. "For years." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She twisted her napkin in her hands, like she didn't know how to say it. "Every time something went wrong, every time they made a bad decision or lost money or screwed something up, they told people it was because of you." I felt my stomach drop. "What?" "I overheard them talking about it once," she said. "They tell everyone that your mistakes are the reason they struggled so much. That they spent all their savings on you. That they had to sacrifice everything to fix what you ruined. They blame you for everything." I stared at her. All these years, I thought they hated me because I had failed them. Because I had disappointed them, humiliated them. But no, they hated me because I was useful. Because I was an easy scapegoat. I sat back in my chair, a laugh bubbling up in my throat. Not because it was funny, because it was so insane that my brain didn't know how else to process it. Sophie watched me cautiously. "Are you okay?" I let out a slow breath. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, I think I am." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The resort didn't feel the same after that conversation. I had arrived hoping for an escape, a few days where I wouldn't have to think about my parents, wouldn't have to feel the weight of everything that had happened between us. But now, I wasn't just escaping. I was waking up. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the guilt of my childhood on my back. I wasn't replaying old memories, wondering if I could have done something different, something better. I finally saw the truth. They had never really hated me for what I did. They hated me because I was useful, and I had spent my whole life believing it was my fault. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. Sophie and I had breakfast by the pool, and for the first time, I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. She actually looked comfortable. Not tense, not guarded. She wasn't picking at her nails like she usually did when she was stressed. She wasn't forcing polite conversation. She was just here, fully present, laughing at dumb jokes and ordering an overpriced fruit smoothie like it was the best thing in the world. I had spent so much time seeing her as their child, the golden one, the perfect one, that I had never really considered how much pressure she was under, too. After breakfast, we wandered down to the beach. The sun was hot, the sand warm under our feet. I let the waves roll up to my ankles, staring out at the horizon. Sophie stood next to me, watching me carefully. "You're really quiet." I shrugged. "Just thinking." She nudged me with her shoulder. "About what?" I hesitated. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I said, "I think I'm done with them." She didn't react right away. Just kept looking at me, like she was waiting for me to say more. "I mean it," I continued. "I don't want to keep trying. I don't want to keep hoping they'll change. I'm tired, sophomore." She let out a slow breath. "Yeah," she said. "I know." I glanced at her. "You do." She smiled sadly. "I think I've known for a while. I just didn't want to admit it." I nodded, kicking at the wet sand. "So what do I do now?" Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You live your life." I let out a small laugh. "That easy, huh?" She grinned. "No. But you deserve to try." I looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see my little sister who had been raised by the same people who had torn me down. I saw someone who understood me better than anyone ever had. Someone who was on my side. For the first time, we weren't just siblings. We were allies. When we got back from the trip, reality hit fast. I was still holding on to that feeling, the lightness, the freedom. But the moment we landed, the weight of them came crashing back down. It started with missed calls. First one from my dad. Then another. Then my mom. By the time I checked my phone, I had at least 10 missed calls and a string of messages. Mom, call me back. Mom, I need to talk to you. Dad, answer your damn phone. I sighed, locking my phone. Sophie glanced at me from the passenger seat as I drove us back from the airport. They know. I let out a humorless laugh. Of course they do. Her phone buzzed next. She checked the screen, sighed, then answered. Hey, Mom. Even from where I was sitting, I could hear our mother's sharp voice through the speaker. Where the hell have you been? Why haven't you answered? Sophie's fingers tightened around the phone. I was on a flight. With him. I gripped the steering wheel harder. Yeah, Sophie said. I was with Alex. Silence. Then a loud, exaggerated sigh. Well, I hope you enjoyed your little vacation while your father and I were home, exhausted, struggling to make ends meet. I rolled my eyes. So did Sophie. Mom loved to act like they were barely scraping by when, in reality, they were fine. She just hated when she wasn't the one benefiting. Sophie pressed her fingers to her temple. Mom, I don't want to argue. Oh, I'm not arguing, Mom said, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. I just think it's interesting that your brother can suddenly afford fancy vacations but couldn't even think to invite his own family. My jaw clenched. There it was. She wasn't mad that I had taken a trip. She was mad that I hadn't spent my money on them. Sophie opened her mouth, but I took the phone from her hand. Hey, Mom, I said. A pause. Then, oh. So now you decide to answer. I exhaled slowly. Yeah. Wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. You're mad because I didn't invite you. Well, wouldn't you be upset if your child went on some extravagant getaway and didn't even consider you? I let out a short laugh. You mean the getaway that I originally booked for you? Silence. That's right, I said. I was going to take you and Dad. But after that dinner, after you called me a black sheep to my face, I figured, why waste my money on people who don't even respect me? Her breath hitched. Oh, please, Alex. You're being dramatic. No, I'm done, I said, my voice steady. Done trying. Done apologizing. Done pretending like I owe you anything. Mom scoffed. We raised you. Fed you. Kept a roof over your head. And this is how you repay us. I laughed, shaking my head. Funny. I don't remember you raising me. Nana and Pops did. Silence. A dangerous, cutting silence. Then, in a low, venomous voice, she said, you always were ungrateful. I stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Yeah, I murmured. Maybe I am. And then I hung up. Sophie sat next to me, gripping her hands together so tightly her knuckles were white. You okay? I asked. She exhaled shakily. I think so. I nodded. For the first time, I felt okay too. A week passed. Then two. I didn't hear from my parents again. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, they had finally given up. That they had accepted the fact that I wasn't going to keep playing their game. I should have known better. It was Sophie who told me. She showed up at my apartment one evening, arms crossed, chewing on the inside of her cheek like she was trying to hold something back. I need to tell you something, she said. I let her in, and she paced the living room, fidgeting with the sleeve of her hoodie. She always did that when she was anxious. Finally, she stopped and looked at me. They've been bragging about you. I frowned. What? To the whole family, she said. About how successful you are. How much money you make. They're telling everyone how proud they are of you now. I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You're kidding. I wish. I shook my head. So let me get this straight. 2 weeks ago, I was a disgrace. A burden. And now they're bragging about me? She hesitated. It gets worse. Of course, it did. She chewed on her lip. They tried to take out a loan. In your name. Everything inside me went still. I stared at her. Say that again. She shifted on her feet. I don't know all the details, but I overheard them talking about it. I think they were trying to use your information to apply for something, like a credit card or a loan. But they got denied. A slow, burning rage crept up my spine. They actually tried to steal from me? I asked, voice low. Sophie winced. I'm sorry. I exhaled sharply, running a hand down my face. Not your fault. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up my accounts, my credit reports, everything. If they had managed to do any damage, I needed to know. Luckily, nothing was missing. But the fact that they had even tried. I sat back, staring at the screen. They had spent my entire life making me feel like I was worthless. Like I was an embarrassment, a mistake. But now that I was doing well, now that I had something they wanted, suddenly, I was valuable to them. I turned to Sophie. I'm done. She nodded slowly. I know. No, I mean really done. I exhaled sharply. I'm going no contact. Completely. Her eyes widened slightly. You mean? I'm cutting them off, I said. For good. A part of me expected to feel guilty saying it out loud. I didn't. Sophie sat down beside me, her hands folded in her lap. I think you should, she said quietly. I nodded. And just like that, it was over. I changed my passwords. Froze my credit. Made sure they couldn't touch anything that belonged to me. And then, I blocked their numbers. I didn't tell them. I didn't give them one last conversation, one last chance to manipulate me. I just let them go. That night, Sophie and I sat on my couch, eating takeout and watching some dumb show. She looked lighter. Like she wasn't carrying so much anymore. Maybe I looked the same. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't waiting for them to love me. I was just free,